bit of a delay, but anyway, here we are. Welcome to the Low-Residency MFA in Visual Studies Winter Intensive Lecture. I'm really happy to have invited Nicholas Frank, and I'm super glad that you could come, so thanks for being here. I wanted to make a couple of announcements for the summer lecture series. Young Hai Cheng Heavy Industries will be here. Clifford Owens, Aria Dean, Sky Hopinka, Ruth Esteves, Jessica Jackson Hutchins, PDP, and Lumi Tan. So this lecture series will be June and July of 2019, every week. I think it'll be a Wednesday, every Wednesday, June and July. But yeah, thanks again for coming, everyone, and let's welcome Nicholas Frank.
Is this thing on? I use that joke at every talk because it's funny. I like the eye roll. That was pretty good. Thank you, Aaron, and Agnes, and Alejandra. I met these guys in Milwaukee, the other Milwaukee, a few years ago. They were great. They were in town, I think, researching, doing some stuff. Temporary art review, I think. In the ski club, right, of course. We had a sort of a mind meld. That's how things happen. People are like-minded. They are interested in the same things. And now I'm in Portland. And I really appreciate you all being here. I had a really fun, good time. I hope you guys did too, doing studio visits all afternoon. And that, I mean, it's maybe one of my favorite things to do is to just talk about ideas and stuff people are working on all day, every day. So I guess that's my advice to students, is really enjoy it while it's here, because it can go away afterwards. But we can just, why don't we just do this thing, talk.
So this is my talk about the history of jazz music in America and Europe in the 19th century, 20th century, sorry, I think about 1900s.
I'm kidding. That was a joke. The title of my talk is its first line, just like in the poems when they do that. Is free improvisation dangerous? Let's see. I'll bet John Corbett didn't think so when he wrote this, A Listener's Guide to Free Improvisation. It was published in 2016, and so written before the end of the world as we know it. Before that, free improvisation was, if free improvisation was considered dangerous, it was meant in a highly protected, specialized way. Like this. Like when Miles Davis said it was really scary playing with John Coltrane, who's a kind of notorious improviser, I guess could be the right word, especially later in his career. His songs became more formless, his solos became less melodic, more freewheeling, and that kind of opened the door for this whole, not just that and other things opened the door for a whole new range of free jazz, now known as free improvisation. And if Coltrane flirted with going off the rails, pardon the pun, I didn't actually intend that pun, it just happens. Sometimes it happens. Coltrane, rails. It makes sense that the form has evolved, like taking the instruments themselves off the rails, using the outside of the cello or the drum, the side, the shell of the instrument as a percussive device, honking, breathing through the wind instrument, taking that term literally, freeing them of their prescribed purposes. Or in Corbett's words, upended and reinvented. Now, Corbett means well in his listener's guide. He wants to help anyone unfamiliar with free improvisation to, I suppose, understand it, to feel less alienated by it. In the beginning, he talks a lot about how we're conditioned for songs our entire lives, to understand this sort of discrete unit, a certain number of minutes, a duration, a melody, a structure, a lot of repetition. That's what we expect. So when all of that goes out the window, we have no idea what's going on. Why are they doing that? And he believes in it as an art form, so he wants to help. He wants to help us understand the intent of the form and maybe even its reasoning. And I like that word because it doesn't appear to have reason behind it. But he wrote this before it was published in 2016. Did he envision this? Sorry. It's a good thing you can barely see that image. It's like a ghost, which one day it might be. And, obviously, I'm not the first person to have this kind of thought. I was reading this book thinking, does he know what happened? He's talking about improvisation as this virtuous field of upending norms, of tossing rules out the window, of, blazing new trails, of having no idea where anything is going, and that's a virtue. And then this happened. The arenas are different, but listen to the values that Corbett expounds upon for just a second here. Let's see. Improvised music is open to everyone. One of its meatiest joys, I love that term, is that anyone can come to it. He compares it to birding. You don't have to be an ornithologist to go birding and to just start looking at birds and learning it in your own way. So he says it's a relatable art form. You don't need to know anything about it. You can just witness it, and that's how you learn. My sense is that old coots like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are gloating because they think they're going to outmaneuver this guy with old procedural tricks and old school politics. I just get that sense. And that's the stuff that like younger politicians, and certainly the politically inexperienced, don't know what to do with. They won't know that stuff. They won't know those tricks. So they think they actually maybe have a mark, and that they'll play him like an instrument. Sorry, I'm really bad on the puns tonight. It's the idea that if we open our government to non-experts, all the old rules go out the window. Anyone can come to it, just like birding, just like free improvised music. That's a virtue, that's a good thing. That's how it should be. Yet we still maintain our grandest American illusions, like old Abe was a Midwestern schoolboy or something, instead of like a highly practiced and dodgy lawyer, who very luckily had a sense of morals at his core, apparently, but also knew all the tricks. So if reality has also been overturned, reinvented in favor of some other version of things, to me it's like has anyone read Don Quixote? Yeah, really? Wow, there's a lot of nods. Apparently he started tilting at windmills and went a little nuts because in the book the sun baked his brain. He was wearing that shiny metal helmet, and he was out in the sun, Spanish desert sun too long, and it like cooked his brain. So if we have this false vision of things, these monsters lurking everywhere, which to those of us who can see reality are shades and illusions, we understand what shared objective experience is. We understand that there are rules like the shells of instruments that have a purpose and can be extended beyond for a purpose or expanded for a purpose. The former values of orderly governance have been thrown out the window, you could say on purpose, or you could say without purpose or direction. Without direction seems to be the new direction. There was this press that started in the 30s called New Directions, renowned for continually publishing new types of writing, new fiction, in particular poetry, and has published some of our most amazing authors over the decades. And we want that. We want change. We want things to supplant other things. We want things to move forward. We don't want to be stuck. We don't want to retrench. We don't want to go backwards. But people obviously have different definitions of change or when change is needed. We want those new directions. All my friends in Wisconsin, the other Milwaukee, were calling for revolution before the election. But obviously that was Revolution Bernie style, right? It was the good kind of revolution. Good because even though people are talking about revolution, you knew you could at least count on that guy not to lead you off a cliff. So it's the values in question here. Values shift and change with the times. So I've, as an artist, have experienced a dynamic shift of context as well, related to a particular project that at one time had a very certain relevance. I'll give you a quick overview. Oops, too far. So it's called the Nicholas Frank Biography. It appears, I know it's difficult to see, that's fine. It appears as these discrete single pages, book pages. They're yellowed with age. It's a trade paperback format, so they're small. It's just black and white and like Bende dot images. And the author is a third-person voice that's unnamed. It's all about Nicholas Frank, the whole book, about what a great artist Nicholas Frank is or was or something. It's obviously it exists itself as a project at some time in the past, so it's unclear. And at one point in the book, the artist Nicholas Frank decides to post-date all of his artwork to the year 1967, which is his birth year, so that everything he's made in his entire lifetime is attributed to that year. It's just one of the things that's in this odd story, because it's odd in part because it just skips a lot. If it were a book, there would be mostly blank pages. So I've made maybe, 40, 50 of these pages. So if it was a 300-page trade paperback, all the middle ones would be blank. And you don't get the context. It just comes in like that, and it just leaves like that. You get a little snippet. But not only can this appear to be a highly narcissistic project, right? Like aggrandizing oneself in the extreme. And narcissism has become a very particular emergency these days. But this whole question of whether, if real isn't real anymore, which I guess in turn means fake isn't really fake anymore, then where does that leave us? Advancing a false narrative seems almost retrograde, or far too much in line with the current change in climate. But there are differences. For example, an alternative fact is its own species of thing. So here's an alternative fact. This, I think Jessica might even be on one of these pages related to this project, because she used to tell me to pay attention to my dreams. And so I attribute the reasoning for this project to her telling me that. And then what I did was I ran a gallery in Milwaukee in real life, IRL, from 1993 to 2001. And when I had to close the gallery, according to the biography, I took all of the artwork that I possessed from all of the artists who I had shown and locked it away in this room-size safe that I did not have the combination to. And no one else did either. So this building, it supposedly, it still exists, the building does. Supposedly it still contains all of that artwork just locked away, unless someone would like blowtorch or blast their way through that door to find the artwork. And in the biography, it's like all these artists are like, why did you do that? That's my work. You don't own my work. And a few artists supported me in this decision, this bizarre decision, including Michelle Grabner, who was an artist in Milwaukee for a number of years. And I still, if people see this page to this day, they're like, really? You did that? I'm like, believe what you want to believe. Because no, I didn't do that. That's part of the book. It's part of the project is to extend reality, the possibilities of reality. It wasn't really a narcissistic project. It was the opposite of that, I think, in some ways. It was like self-deprecating, like, okay, so I live in Milwaukee. Nobody cares about an artist in Milwaukee. Nobody's ever going to pay enough attention to me where I get, this kind of attention in a trade paperback published about what a great genius I was. So I'll just do it myself. I'll take care of that. And so, yeah, a pretty strange blend of narcissism and self-deprecation for a purpose. So now the dialogue on alternative facts. So let's say ocean temperatures have risen steadily due to human-made carbon emissions. No, they haven't. There's no evidence of voter suppression, but much evidence of no evidence of voter fraud, but much evidence of voter suppression. No, there isn't. Our country is being sold down the river. No, it's not. Oh, thank you. Dramatic. Yeah. So now listen to this sense of balanced dialogue in Corbett's Manual for Listening. Indulge me for a second here. The easiest kind of interaction is to recognize, the easiest kind of interaction to recognize is the conversation. Just to keep it simple, take a duet. One player suggests something, the other responds and offers a bit more. The first one builds on the response, and so on. Carried out too obviously, dialogue can turn into a musical seesaw. One up, one down, not really going anywhere or developing. But it's elemental, an essential part of musical communication. As in daily life, when you hear people exchanging ideas this way, it tells you one key thing. They're listening to one another, paying attention to what the other is saying. That conveys a certain kind of respect and dignity. And when it's really working, it can have an organic quality, rolling effortlessly like a late-night bull session. Also, adding more players makes dialogue exponentially more complex and more difficult. Like a roundtable discussion, dialogical improvising has an upper threshold of participants. Anything good with more than 6 players is pretty unusual. Or it requires a moderator, like a musical score or a conductor. A really good, really big, free improvising group, like a 10-piece, is nearly mythological. That starts to sound like society to me. So Corbett makes explicit that the moves an improviser makes are not necessarily the right ones. The key tenet of the art form is that the purveyor allows oneself, and is allowed, the freedom to meander down a path that might turn out to be wrong. The leader of the moment doesn't have to be believed. In fact, the freedom comes in not being believed. Gesundheit. There might be a desire not to be believed. No autocrat can stomach not being believed. The difference in one kind of action is virtuous, the other is very much not. It has no sense of shared values or of interchange. So, my Artpace residency happened in January 2017, right after that election. All the plans I had going in, right? It was a different world. How could I possibly just keep doing the same thing? There's absolutely no way. So there were some radical shifts in my approach, and yet the basis of my approach remained the same, and that was a big discovery for me. I believe in audience, in the power of audience. I equated some of that participation, non-participation, apathy, and confusion in that election to issues with audience. And what I wanted to do initially was, like learn a lot about San Antonio. And in this case, I decided to really go for it and flip the equation. So rather than San Antonio being the audience to Nicholas Frank, the artist, it was me being an audience to San Antonio. And to that end, I did a few things. I opened my residency space while I was working there to a group show of San Antonio artists that I curated. This is it. This picture also illustrates like my working space. So I get a lot of used records. So I was listening to those. That's my chair. This is another sculpture I was working on. And the group shows on the walls. That's actually on the left is a fabric dye painting made by Amada Miller, who's sitting right there in the audience. We actually fell in love while I was there, and we got married recently. But this is one of my first exposures to her, was seeing her work in a studio visit and including her in that show. And so the central piece is this giant sculpture, which is a set of bleachers. And if you stood and looked at them, they were a sculpture, and if you sat on them, they were bleachers. Like that. And so we're talking upending, reinventing, obviously, in some other ways. Here, they're looking at the show. They're looking at San Antonio artists. During the run of the exhibition, after my formal residency period, the exhibition was up for 2 months, and the bleachers moved around into various positions. This was probably the most extreme right at the end of the show. There was a glass chain, 32-foot glass chain running between the pillars dividing the space. I would say it's a border, it's an automatic difference, a division, it's an idea of division. You're on one side or the other, basically, and it's also about the fragility of the idea of division. But I arrived in January, I arrived on January 19th, 2017, the day right before the Women's March. I was very grateful to be able to join the Women's March in San Antonio that day, looking at pictures on the internet of people in Washington, D.C. with their pussy hats. It was amazing all around, and also very, disheartening. Everybody felt destroyed. Well, not everybody. So I'd already been interested in audience, reinventing, maybe even radicalizing the notion of audience, and applying the condition to the voting public in this case, in the sense that an audience tends to see itself as a passive body. I mean, right now you're all sitting there very quietly, paying attention to varying degrees. You're participating. It's an active attention. You can also become a mass body and overthrow me and take the microphone away. It requires some collaboration on your part. I think John Corbett also provides some direction for dealing with our current situation. As artists, as thoughtful people, I think he's assuming his audience there. I will quote again. The section Fundamentals. He uses a term called moment form, which is an awareness of how a form or a musical phrase that's collaborative and interactive among a number of players evolves over a moment. And that as a listener, you will understand, glean, see that form as it unfolds, kind of hold it in your head as a mind object. According to this approach, a given musical event should feel neither like it came out of anything before it, nor should it suggest a direction that it's headed. It should just be what it is, discrete, a moment, an intensity, crystallized and then let go, followed by another unique moment, apprehended and released. No chain of events, no development, no past, no future. I mean, that sounds hauntingly familiar, right? I guess beat myself up a bit going through all the headlines of all the stories, admittedly in the more left-leaning press, about our current situation, which shall remain unnamed, having no purpose, no direction, no understanding, no goals. And again, I return to this idea, like this was written, you could say, in an age of innocence, but I believe it still holds. It holds as a kind of key to understanding the kind of communication that we're dealing with right now. Quoting again, this is a little more advanced, but it's still elemental. If you can start to feel the way an improvisation is shifting, the nodes of change and the passages of stasis, you naturally start to hear the piece as a whole, which is essential if you want to assess anything about the broader implications of its shape and structure. He has a car metaphor about this process, saying that you wouldn't really want a group of improvised musicians to be a car. To return to the car metaphor, it would be like driving an automobile in which relationships between the parts and the motor are repeatedly reinvented. All those hoses and fans and gears constantly reconnected, retooled, recalibrated, en route. The spark plug suddenly not sparking, instead deciding to channel antifreeze. Now, I ask you, the audience, how do you still get that car where it's supposed to go? Perfect. Perfect ending. Thank you. No, that was it. Thank you. I told Amada earlier, I was like, I don't really have an ending for this. And she's like, just wing it. Yeah, does anybody have any thoughts, comments, questions? It's strange because I grew up with the fear of Russia drilled into me in the 80s. This movie called The Day After Tomorrow. No, maybe that was a climate movie. What was it called? What was the one it was nuclear bombs being rained down on the United States by Russia. The Day After. Right? Very similar title, that's why I got confused. But yeah, The Day After. And then Red Dawn, there's this guy, Jim. He was in this band. He had kind of a rough childhood. So he ended up he was in a band I was in. He ended up staying at our house, sleeping on the couch. And he watched Red Dawn every night for 30 nights straight. That's the opposite of improvisation. Any other thoughts, questions, ideas?
How would you define free improvisation?
Well, in one of these drafts, I was like, that shit drives me crazy. Batshit crazy is the word I used because, it's like, it's always dudes. And then they're like, I mean, we played a little at the beginning, right? It's like, and I don't know, it brought out the conservatism in me. I was like, where's the composition? Where's the resolution? Where's the structure? It's just it's noodling, it's just they're doing it for themselves and I'm supposed to sit here and watch. It's the thing I like about Corbett's book is he's trying to bridge my gap in understanding so to allow me to know that I'm a participant by being an observer, by following the we could call it an emergent narrative without a narrative structure.
He also functions as a conductor for any pre-improvisation that you hear ever after, because he's creating a structure that you impose on any experience that you have with pre-improvisation.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. Yeah.
It's kind of it's almost like two of those structuralists. It's like being deconstructed, taken apart, and then but it's still inside of the structure that it's deconstructed. Is that common?
So you're saying as an explicator, his thoughts will change your experience. Oh, interesting. Huh, yeah. Yeah, and I suppose that happens with the maturation of any new form, is it starts to become more familiar, and then it has its own tenets that need to be reinvented, upended, destroyed. And he's smart enough, he goes into that a little bit at the beginning and end of the book. Yeah. He's both a purist and an anti-purist. He's strange, but very thoughtful. So I didn't answer your question at all. I was just improvising. But it's like an exchange. There's a person in San Antonio who all summer kept using the word intercambio, which is an interchange between cultures, and specifically because in these interchanges a lot can be lost in the translation, or think of trying to speak in a language that's secondary to you and you're learning, and knowing what you want to say and not being able to say it. So I think maybe imposing that kind of restriction on yourself in order to build your understanding of someone else's experience in an unfamiliar culture, or without automatic approval or feeling that they have a place. And I actually think there is a kind of morality to this music, at least in Corbett's sense of it. And that it's about that this is a music of the future. This is like going to be as important as jazz music became, because it's representative of not knowing where we're headed together in a together way, though, not in a fractious way. And he, this interesting thing, he says, I never use the word improv. That's something else. That's like, hey, come on up. Let's, you're my third cousin Anne, and, you are a wall climber, or what do they call that? And you're stuck, and you need help. Okay, go. And the rule for that is yes and. So if you're a participant, you never reject that scenario. You're like, oh, yes, and then you contribute. And so it's this endless chain of yes and. And Corbett's like very explicitly states that in free improvisational music, you can say no. He says if you don't say no, it just turns into New Age. Because New Age just says yes to everything. So, you as a player have a freedom to kind of comment on where you're at and what you're given and where you want to take it. And, in that sense, it can seem sort of like a battle of egos. And I think at times it could become that. But, so it's that, again, it's always this question, like, how do you forge cooperation out of a battle of egos? Or what happens if you don't? Any other? Yeah.
Maybe they're just two really separate things. Although in San Antonio you totally merged them.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously working with people is really different than working with materials.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just wanted to ask you about that, and if you're still doing a lot of that, or if you have plans for that, or your relationship to your history, that anything that.
Yeah, no, I really like some of the ways you asked that question. And I think that Artpace thing was really important to me for a number of reasons other than personal ones. But that's the thing that I was going to do before I went there. That didn't change because I saw it as being still relevant. This idea of like flipping the power structure. I don't normally reduce things to power dynamics, but it is that kind of thing where like, like the names that, or my name, Nicholas Frank, like that's, you have to pay attention to that. Look, there's a poster on the wall. It's got my picture on it. I'm important. You have to come to this lecture. You're going to learn stuff. So that assumes this audience presenter kind of relationship. Of course, there's a lot that goes into that, right? But I had this feeling of like, okay, it's not just in the sense of justice, low level. It's maybe unjust to just like be parachuted onto San Antonio, a place I know nothing about, and make a project that people there are supposed to pay attention to. Like, why? I wanted to break down that assumption. Why? Why should you care? Really? And of course, like, yeah, there's a lot there. People like contemporary art there. There's a built-in fan base for Artpace due to its long-standing reputation. Clifford Owens, by the way, was at Artpace recently. We got to meet him. He's cool. Definitely go see him. You'll have fun. And so it was a gesture of, like a true way to try to open this thing up literally to the community of San Antonio. And hey, Lottie. You know, in a way that they could see themselves reflected there quite directly or quite literally. And yet it was curated, you know, it wasn't just a free-for-all. It was like I spent time, I did studio visits, I learned about artists' practice, and I had a theme for the work based on some of the work that I had seen, put together the show, had an opening, and this was in my residency space, during my residency when I was, you know, producing work. And so it was also a statement that that's part of my work, and that there is no separation between my notion of curation and art making. And then this other piece that I didn't show you, I suppose we could dim the lights again for a second if Ben is still chilling and willing up there. And the piece is just called Credits Roll. So it's movie credits. It's every single person or place behind the name Nicholas Frank that you see on the door of my space. So everyone who contributed to that show in any way is listed in this credits that ran, what, like 6.5 minutes? Like movie credits. So this is really a very brief snippet. Again, you see social engagement and facilitation in San Antonio, and there's Robert Hodge and Kate Newby were the other Artpace artists there at the time. Chris Castillo is the first person who I met there, who picked me up from the airport. He works at Artpace. Some of the other staff, people who I met there, people who facilitated meeting, people, all of whom contributed meaningfully in some way to this show. And I just wanted to like pry open that name, that equation, so people understand what it is to produce something very directly, so that Nicholas Frank is the thing you see, and you could attribute my work to that, but you also have to attribute it to the staff and all that network of connection and mutual, I guess, production. There's a lot of different words you could use there, engagement. That go into producing something like that. So, he was in the Llano section. Did you see that? So I did a lot of exploration while I was there, and I took side trips, and one of them was to, okay, so this is called domestic, so that's all like where I bought stuff, the coffee that I preferred and bought. And yeah, social engagement and facilitation in Llano. Was Maggie and Jesper. Jesper's in this band called Endless Boogie that's basically my favorite band. And I mean, the connection, the reason Jessica asked is because they played at her wedding. And that's where I first saw them, and then, you know, I've just been following them ever since. And anyway, I was a latecomer to Instagram, and somehow, whatever those random connections are on Instagram, I found out that Endless Boogie had a store in Llano, Texas, which was like an hour drive from San Antonio. And so I just went there, and I was like, hey, you're my favorite band. And they were really sweet. Maggie runs the store with Jesper. And they introduced me to Rats, this great, if you ever want to find yourself in Llano, Texas and want to go record shopping, this place is amazing. So as you saw, I buy lots of used vinyl and do a lot of DJing. We now DJ together as Frank and Lil Dad. We're available for impromptu DJing, so we're here till Sunday. Yeah, but again, it's like, how far does this network extend? How many dimensions does that name you see have? It's just, it's such a fallacy that any one artist name, which is the brand that we're all expected to go by and build over time because it's the way people can categorize us as familiar. And that's important, but it's also like there's so many dimensions to that name. And I just wanted to make a piece that, I guess, honored that situation. And it felt like another kind of way of, not allowing that reduction of a single name to hold all the power. Any other questions? It's very dramatic now. I guess you can turn the lights back on, Ben. I drew my parameters directly on that project. And so, no, you'd think like, yeah, thank you, Mom and Dad, for making me, but, because of course. But like, no, and I think that's a really important question. And I did have to limit it, and it was just directly involved in that project. Yeah.
I guess I'm just that there's the element of production to our work, there's the element of conception, there's the element of support of the conception.
Yeah.
So sort of once you say the name is only a name, there's actually this multifaceted,
Yeah.
insane group of influences.
And it's a good question to ask because I guess that this is, a sort of metaphor of that then, of that much, 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 much larger network. So using the show as a kind of capsule vehicle to suggest that. Yeah. I just had another thought while I was talking, but it fell out of my head. Something else. One more question? I don't even know how long we're supposed to go. 2 more? 8 more? Singing? Anybody want to sing? I got a live mic here. Ooh, wait. I didn't forget. I don't know, there's that one light. Can that one go off, or does they all have to go off? It's giving me that extreme. Just that one right in my face. I mean, it's not the worst situation in the world. But that's what that weird fisheye Artpace piece was, is I took a picture of the audience for my artist talk. So everybody was like staring at me. I like that. Okay. One more? I can do this all night. Okay. Thank you. I truly appreciate you being here. And what the heck? I guess I'll see half of you in the morning, right? Or something.